Thank you both so much for taking the time and joining me on Angle on Producers. Heather, welcome. It's lovely to finally meet you and get some time together for such an important cause. And Joy, I cannot believe I was looking this up. It was 2 years ago that we
It
recorded.
was.
Yeah. Yes,
Time
ma'am.
flies when our business is crumbling.
Exactly. And at the time we recorded, I think there was a sense of like, I think there was an optimism in the air. It was a 21, I think. There was just like
Yeah.
good vibes. I think everyone was really feeling like that optimism of rebounding from the pandemic and the sort of tsunami of work opportunities that came for many people in 21, I think led us to really feel like things were shifting in a really positive direction. And here we are, May of 24, and that doesn't really seem to be the case. I mean, on the heels of a really hard 23 back-to-back strikes and market contraction, the revolution that is AI, for better or for worse, and how that's going to impact our business fundamentally. Like there's just so much. And even being almost halfway through the year, which is crazy, we're on the heels of IATSE and Teamster strikes potentially again. And there's just so much
Yep.
in the air. And I know so many people across every discipline of our industry have been really feeling the pressures and the strain of these last 4 years. I feel like
Yeah.
it feels fair to say, right? So I really always like to try to find the positive on the podcast because we know as producers what we do is so hard. It takes it's so much effort and labor of love when you start, and at every as you climb as well, it doesn't get any easier. But I admit that lately it's been harder and harder to incentivize and give others who are listening the optimism, sort of stay the course, because we're looking at the reality of what's happening and how things are crumbling. And we're in a
Yeah.
crisis. Like the industry's in a crisis, but producers specifically have been in a crisis. And I I'm just wondering at what point this is going to change. And so I'm so grateful that so many of you guys have started Producers United with a mission to help from the top up, bring our community into this conversation and help us find a solution so that we can all be here and do the work that we love.
Mhm.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So will you tell us just a little bit about Producers United, how you guys came together, why this, why now, and what is it fundamentally that you are fighting for?
Well, I mean, I'm newer to the group, I think, than Heather is. Um, and over the last few months, I think it started towards the end of 23, Heather, would you say?
It
Um,
was about a year ago.
yeah.
Yeah.
And some of our, colleagues and friends had come together to talk about sort of this systemic degradation, really, of what it is to be a producer. That there's a proliferation of the producer credit that also comes alongside the pool of money to pay producers getting smaller and smaller. And we're all super collaborative people who love to work together. We love to partner with our friends who are hyphenate producers. I feel so lucky to have those partners on so many of my projects. But the fact is that there's a different job of producers who are solely compensated as producers, who are not getting any upfront money for development, are not getting a commission as a manager or paid as a producing partner to someone. And it's a very different role. And so a group of people who include hyphenates as well, there are people in that group who run incredibly successful production companies, came together to talk about how can we protect the role and value of producing. I've been so blown away by the folks who I look up to, Kathy Schulman, Lorenzo de Bonaventura. I mean, folks who you would think they're so successful, they've run studios before, they must not have to be concerned with this. And they're not only truly concerned, but they're taking up the mantle to protect the career of producers. And I mean, Kathy had the biggest movie of in Amazon history, I think, last weekend, and she was on the phone with us and sending out talking points and getting captains ready for their studio meetings. And I have to tell you, it's so heartening at a time where it's scary for producers like us, to know when we're going to be able to, see our next green light. It is so heartening to see a group of folks who are so accomplished come together and fight this.
I think what I would add to everything that Joy said is that Producers United came together very optimistically in face of, the difficult times that we've been through that you were referencing, Carolina, but very specifically with the next generation in mind. That this really, in many, many ways, is about how do we protect the integrity and the sustainability of this career producer role. Everyone sees things optimistically, but they're also referencing this as a potential extinction event, and getting really realistic about that the producing role has been so degraded for a number of reasons. And that at this point in time, something has to be done. I mean, producers are one of the only roles in the industry that are not unionized. And
Yes.
while Producers United is not a union or a unionization effort, there is an entirely other group, and there's a lot of crossover between the two groups, but there is a producers union, which was founded by Rebecca Green and Chris Moore, and is now who is now led by co-president Brent Palmer. And that group has been working for the past several years to unionize, and hopefully they will have success, because all of these different efforts are really coming together and working together, which is, I think, one of the things that's the most powerful about this. People are really united. And these are folks that have known each other for years. They've been competing against each other for years for IP or whatever it may be. But everyone is coming together at this point and really trying to protect something that is so important in terms of how content gets made in our industry.
Just going to say the system is broken, and so I think that we have to put aside the healthy competition that keeps the heart and palpitations of this industry, keeps us all going, to create a system that can actually set everybody up for success. Otherwise, what is the point?
Yeah, absolutely.
A lot of this is about basic education. We all go home to Thanksgiving or to our in-laws, and people are like, what's a producer? It sounds very fancy. We sound like these super powerful, especially executive producer sounds very powerful. But what people don't really know is the role of the producer is to identify material, to option that material, to hire the writer, to find the financing, to put the entire project together, either alone or with a small group of other producers, and that we producers are not compensated until cameras roll on a project. There is not, at least in television, there's not a standard development fee. And in television, you could be, 6-month pre-production, staffing a whole writer's room, overseeing 8 to 10 to 20 scripts, and you're not paid until cameras roll. And in movies, there was a development fee established in 1971, 12.5 upfront when you sell a script or a pitch, and then the other half of the 25 being paid later in the process. So with inflation, that would barely pay for one of our assistants for 6 to 8 weeks. A lot of us are carrying our companies, our staffs, the young, brilliant people that we mentor, and those folks are waiting to get to be on set with us when that movie and that show gets made, right? That's the golden ring that we're all reaching. And with, overhead deals getting cut post-strike, and really not a lot of producers who are not tied to talent are getting re-upped and getting overall in first look deals at their training. I mean, if I didn't have Steve Golan in my life as my mentor, whose motto was, we produce producers, right? I wouldn't have had the luxury of making little indie movies until I could learn how to run a big giant television show. I remember, because I used to be a manager at Anonymous Content, so I've also been a hyphenate, and I know, the difference. And both are very jobs, but I remember going to Steve Golan and saying, I don't want to manage anymore. I want to be a producer full time. And he said, producers need to have a rich spouse or rich parents, and you don't have either. So even he knew very early on that this was not an easy career to sustain. The question here is, how do we sustain it? How do we uplift each other? How do we uplift the next generation? How do we make sure that we can compensate the people who work with us and for us and are coming up with great material and need veterans on set when see it through to the end,
Yeah. Absolutely. I mean, it's everything you touched upon, Joy, is one of the reasons I started the show 5 years ago, is because I got frustrated with having to explain what a producer did, and also being cognizant of the fact that I barely could define it for myself, because there's so many producers in the umbrella. It depends on the project, it depends on the scope, and you can have the same title and do a completely different job on a completely different project. It's not standardized because what we do isn't standardized. And I know that that's what makes it hard to put cute little boxes around how do we define and the metrics, and how do you take something that is so amorphous and then create this structure to which we can live within. But I think that the times of thinking about it that way are gone, and we have to find a way to coexist in both, right? And who better than producers to figure out how to make that impossible possible. So I think, what I understand of what Producers United want, I don't think it's anything astronomical that is being asked. We want a change in fee structure so that you're not spending years of your life working essentially for free. When you get projects greenlit, even in prep, everyone else is getting paid. Everyone else has a union that protects them. We don't have that for our fees or for our credits, which are often given out by studios or by business affairs. There's no governing body that actually says, oh, you are the person who was fiscally and physically, creatively responsible from cradle to grave, right? And we look at the credits, there's 47 producers. You're like, who did what? That's and there essentially healthcare is another big one. A lot of people don't realize that producers don't have access to healthcare, even though there's MPI. A lot of people don't know about that or don't qualify for that. So how do we sustain the very people that are putting in their blood, sweat, equity, their life's energy into these years of development, to then get to a point when you do get paid, even if you're working in these higher budget ranges, you're being asked to cut your fee. You're being removed from potential backend, which back in the day, right, was how producers would say, all right, I'll take a gamble on myself on this project, on this filmmaker, and I'll take less upfront, because if we sell it, that's the payoff. That doesn't exist anymore.
Yeah.
So all of the ways in which producers could have these financial windfalls that could sustain them without rich partners, or parents for a couple of years are gone. And we know that $25,000 of development 1 year, how many of those do you have to even have to have a baseline of living in a place like Los Angeles and New York with,
right.
It's truly unsustainable. And
not everyone gets those fees. I mean, that,
right. And that's the people that get the fees. Exactly.
Right.
Yeah.
And, what's important to mention is we're not asking for extra money. We're literally just asking for a change in fee structure, a small advance on a future fee, so that if you're in development for 2 years or 5 years, Czar, one of the heroes of our team at Producers United, just made a movie that a book he optioned in 1995. 29 years he was in development on something. So, I don't think people outside our business really know how committed we can be to some, all of us have stories of holding on to something, for 15 years, for 10 years.
Yeah.
That's what we all do so well, right? It's that loyalty and love it requires to get line. But if folks doing that can't make a living wage, we're going to lose some of the most important stories that really truly reflect the culture, and the possibility of goes out the window because folks who really need to be heard, audiences who are looking to see themselves, the people who can tell their stories can't afford to tell them,
Yeah.
Yeah, that, I mean, I would definitely add that when we're at the deep challenges to sustainability, it certainly impacts the demographics of producers that are the most important in terms of, the kinds of voices that we need to hear from. We've had several years now where there's been, a real emphasis on inclusion. And the reference that Joy made to her mentor telling her, you're going to have, a rich husband family. I mean, that's sort of, and he was saying that sort of tongue in cheek, but there's something really poignant about that, which is that this is really about being able to protect the most important voices at the same time. This is the future. The Producers United is really clear that a lot of this has to do with education. And the Producers Union, PGA, several of these groups, there's been a lot of conversation about, reaching the hearts and minds of people, even within our industry, to understand what producers generally speaking, I think people don't really understand what the producing role entails. And it's extensive. And it's also a high level of, and so, one of the efforts that's underway right now is literally this, which is to have these conversations. And thank you so much, Carolina, for your 5 years of doing this podcast. It's really important and really admirable because this is the very conversation that needs to be happening, which is educating people. I think that the hybridization when the roles aren't truly balanced, because yes, there are hybrids. Joy referenced some of her partners. I've had very strong partners that are writer, director, producers, including Erica Tremblay, a filmmaker that I just worked with on a film, Fancy Dance, that's coming out
Congrats.
next
Beautiful
month.
film.
That is a director that's a true producer.
Yes.
And so, yes, there are very strong hybrids. But at the same time, I think that for years, people have been trying to figure out the ways to have leverage in an industry that can make you feel very disempowered.
Yeah.
And what happened, and this is my own theory, is that over time, that's what people felt they could, because there's been nothing in place to protect this position. There's no institutional, formation around this position. So it kind of became what was up for grabs. So it's become much more not normalized now for an actor and their manager or a financier or whoever it may be to be asking and even demanding a producer's credit. And then in addition to that, wanting to pay, financially at a greater level, and that then becomes the producer's pool that they're wanting to draw. So it's systemic degradation is what it really is. And that's why the reference to the extinction event is that if this keeps happening, if this train keeps rolling in the direction that it's been going, it's literally going to completely undermine this really, really important role that we all play in creating.
Sorry, go ahead, Joy.
And to be clear, like Erica Tremblay, so many incredible actors are real producers who show up and do the work and are building beautiful slates and businesses. I mean, I am so lucky to be partnered with Kerry Washington and Pilar Savone on Unprisoned. Like, there are so many folks who are incredible. Definitely not but what it is we also can't all be punished for our collaboration, right? We can't, when we partner to make something, expect everyone to be, and so I think that's kind of what we're struggling with, is finding a job.
Well, and it feels like the power dynamics have shifted, right? Like there was a time when producers were at the helm of this. They got overall deals. They were the ones putting projects together and packaging talent. And now it's so much of it is talent led. And like you said, Joy, if you're a producer who happens to be connected to a writer, director, or a piece of talent that moves the needle, then that's a privileged place to be in. It feels like the most sure way to sustain yourself as a producer is to be somehow connected to someone, ideally who, exactly like you said, is actually building a company and wants to produce. But we've all heard of companies where that isn't necessarily the intention. I think a lot of people think, because they don't know what producing is, like, well, how hard can it be? And then they launch a company and they go, oh, holy shit, they fired, unsubscribe. I actually don't want to do a bit more, because when I came into Hollywood in 2006, like, maybe I watched too much Entourage, but I had a very different dream of like what my life could look like 20 years into a career as a producer in Hollywood, and what opportunities and what wins and what successes could be available to me. And I am living proof that for as hard as I've worked, right, for a variety of reasons. And so I keep trying to understand, how do we educate the industry and creators and creatives to really understand our place in that ecosystem, so that they can potentially come along for the ride, but in true partnership as opposed to a means of, yeah.
Well, and to add to what part of the issue is we also are educating our buyers, our studio executives, right? Who, for good reason, once material gets to them, they don't want to see 12 producers and make it their job to report to a number of parties. So often I'll try to be sort of the hub of a project development, and make sure that I'm keeping my studio executives away from the minutia of reporting to all of the different producers, but letting them know that, yes, because you've worked with me before and I have a track record and you trusted me and you bought me this article or these life rights, I will be, the buck will stop with me, right, on a project when I sell it. But when you're trying to get competitive, the agent will ask for EP credits on a TV show for never been that have never made a show before, you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
And you end up in a situation where by the time you have a writer, by the time you have a director, you've got 9, 10, 8, 6 EP credits on a TV show that isn't yet. And the time that gets to, Netflix, they're looking at you like, what the heck were you people doing for the last 3 years? Important that we all, and again, like, I love partnerships. We love collaboration. Like, I have so many wonderful partners. There's a lot of miscommunication that could happen when we just throw everything under this one umbrella of producer or of that makes it hard for someone to be accountable for this multi-million. That's what, we're trying to not only help our fellow producers produce things efficiently, but we're also trying to help the studio so that they continue to trust us and give us their money to make these things.
Yeah, I mean, so now you guys are out there having meetings with studios, going, a feeling and impression you're getting from these real world conversations and this education. And do you have plans to potentially expand beyond talking to just studios, getting the unions to understand what producers are asking for, disseminate this information to their members? Everyone is very pro-union and is obviously just an American right, a human right to be able to work and get paid for the work that we do proportionately. But I'm curious how those conversations have been going, and if there are potential plans to bring the unions into this so we can be an even bigger collective voice.
Well, we are not a union, but what Producers United is committed to doing is representing all producers. You don't have to have ever met a single person in this group to know that your rights are being fought for and protected by these couple of small asks, rights that that we're asking for. It's on behalf of everyone. No one has to be any member of anything. Of course, almost all are members of Producers United. So, you know, collaboration across all groups of producers is encouraged and embraced, and that's important. And I am not one of the captains who's been in the studio meetings, but we get reports from our fearless leaders that it's going, feel really supported by the folks that they've been sitting down with. So
I think by and large, the conversations have been welcomed. You know, the other side of this, which I think it's fair to acknowledge from the studio streamer side, when the credit is, you know, being handed out, but not necessarily, you know, delivered on, there creates the other side of this issue, which is people who are supposedly producers, but are not actually delivering on that responsibility. And that creates a lot of problem for the studios. They need career producers, the kinds of producers that Producers United represents and includes in its membership and is fighting for. The studios need the producers to be doing, and really would like, you know, from everything that we're being told, because I'm also not on one of the, you know, captain's teams, but these conversations are welcomed because it's time, you know, it's coming in its right time. United is, you know, completely respectful of and in alignment with the other unions and guilds and whatnot. I think it's, again, as I was saying earlier, really important for this to be this collective understanding and an alignment at the same end. But, you know, this group is doing something very specific, which is these activations within the studio and streamer system, and really engaging and having these high level conversations that, you know, ideally, hopefully, are really going to result in something and create systemic change.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think too, just to that note, I think it would be wonderful if that level of education was also able to be given to members of the WGA and the DGA, because especially the newer people coming up and the trainees, like, no one has any idea of any of this. And sometimes you're on set and you see and you have a perception of a romanticized idea of what you think a producer's doing or how much they're getting paid. And you go, well, I want to do that. And you don't quite understand the nuances of it. So I think education is key. And I hope that, you know, this conversation has been informative for everyone listening. It's what we aim to do here. And, you know, we touched a little bit on like why producers haven't ever been able to unionize, why it's so complicated. There's a great episode with Laura Lewis. I want to listen to it. But also I know Rebecca Green and Chris Moore have been trying or still attempting this. So it's still something that is very much at the forefront. But I do want to clarify, like to your point, that there is space for that, and we're eager and hungry for that to get figured out, because again, it only helps boost the collective and create the longevity that that we're all after. And I wanted to just share, not to end on a depressing note, we'll end on a good note, but just wanted to share some old data that I was looking in preparation for this chat. That Dear Producers did a sustainability 2019 and 2020. And in January 21, they reported their findings. And, you know, 550 producers who answered, a lot of them report really not earning more than $25,000 in a year. And that is staggering. And again, this is more focused on independent producers, but it just to the fact that this is continues to be a dire problem and crisis in our industry. And that here we are in 2024. And I don't know if we did this study now, if the numbers would be that much better, frankly, you know? So again, just more evidence of why this movement is so important. And if you're not a producer, if you're any other discipline in this industry, like why you should care, because producers are here to help, you know, make these projects come to life, to keep crews safe, to keep us all moving forward in the same direction. And without the people that really are front and center, carrying the baton and really doing it with integrity, like I think it's going to continue to be a problem, and it'll impact the collective health of how we make things as well. So it's not just a producer crisis, it's an entire industry concern.
Well, and
Absolutely.
our main job is to keep our artists being artists and give them the power and the resources to write those beautiful scripts, to direct those beautiful scenes, and the actors to be able to act in them. And if we can't keep them away from the minutia of production and do that job, their art, is severely affected. And ultimately, that's what we're all here for: tell stories together. And so we just want to lock arms with our writers and our directors and our fellow producers and make sure that that opportunity doesn't go away.
Yeah, beautifully
Absolutely.
said. Well, wonderful. Thank you both again for taking the time, for sharing this with us, going a little bit deeper. I'll link to the article for those who want. There's so much good information here. Every quote I was pulling, I was like, by the time I was done pulling quotes, I'm just going to link to this article. And would love to hear your thoughts for those listening and what your takeaways are and additional questions you may have. Maybe we'll do a part 2. So thank you both so much. I really appreciate
Thank you.
it.